Today, I'm going to show you how to touch up hair in Adobe Photoshop. What's cracking, boys and girls? It's your boy Melo K. Have you ever come home and looked at your photos on your computer and you've noticed that there's a lot of flyaways, aka stray hairs, across your model's face? Who am I kidding? Of course you have. I'm going to teach you a couple of tips and tricks in Adobe Photoshop on how we could tie up those loose ends, add volume to the hair, and how to make the hair pop. So let's get it. So the most obvious method is using the spot healing tool and the stamp clone tool. Now there's a ton of video tutorials on how to do it, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. But basically, it's the method that gives you the most control and flexibility. So generally I use the spot healing tool for hair across the face. What I do is I create a new layer, go to the spot healing tool, select content aware and sample all layers because we're on the empty layer on top. So we want to sample everything underneath it. Photoshop will work out the surrounding texture and will then replace the hair. So I just go over it. The bigger you do it, the worse it gets. So just do it in small steps. But as you can see, if I went across here, where there's some hair, it does the job, but it doesn't do it quite well. So when it comes to the flyaways that's buried within hair, I then go to the regular healing brush tool. And I select sample, normal, current layer and below, because again, we're working on the top empty layer. And the diffusion set to 1. Now with diffusion, the general rule of thumb is the area that you're healing, if it's detailed, then you use a lower diffusion number. If the area is not as detailed, then you use a higher diffusion number. So say like your skies or your background that's been crushed by depth. So for the flyaways buried in the rest of the hair, I use a diffusion of 1. Then I go across and I pick out a similar pattern and follow the flow of it. So using the black line here, I will come across and clone that. So it's usually just finding the straight lines and then using that as a reference to then clone across. I'll make it a bit smaller. So just a quick before and after. Before and after. Missed a spot here. I'll use another example. So here I will create a new layer. Now for flyaways around the edges of the hair, I generally use a stamp clone tool. And this is particularly effective when the background is just really simple and crushed by the depth. So not a lot of detail, it's all blurred out because of the depth of field. So in this example here, the backdrop or the wall behind Selena is blurred. So what I do is I mask out the areas that I want to retain using the pen tool. Now I go Control Enter to make a selection, and then I'm going to go to Select, Modify, and then Feather. I'm going to feather about 3 pixels, not too much. From there, I'm going to go Control Shift I to invert the selection, and basically my whole working canvas now is here. Select the stamp clone tool, and then select a soft brush. So 0% hardness. Make sure to select current and below because we're working on the top layer, an empty top layer. And then just sample from the backdrop. So before and after. Obviously tidy up the smudges behind, so I can use the spot healing tool or just the healing tool in general, and of course increase the size. I'm going to set the diffusion to a bit higher, maybe 5, and then I'm going to just go over that a little bit more. There we go. Tidied up the flyaways on top of Selena's hair. Now, if I don't use a mask, this is what happens when I use the stamp clone tool. It'll start smudging into the hair itself. And now, of course, it looks gross. So that's why we do the masking. Let's go back to this example of Jada. So sometimes I'm lazy, right? And I don't want to do all that healing and spot healing and stamp cloning and whatnot. So here's a little trick that I do. I would select all the layers, convert to a smart object, which will allow me to apply filters on top and freely adjust it whenever I want to, but at the same time retain some of the skin retouching underneath it or whatever the edits are underneath. And it'll automatically update, because when you go back into the smart object to edit those touch-ups, then it'll also reflect in the smart object. So once I have the smart object, I'm going to go to filter, liquify. Let's zoom in a little bit by holding control and clicking. Now what I'm going to do is I create a freeze mask. Now what a freeze mask does in Liquify is that it prevents any of that area that's been masked to be, I guess, affected. So to do this, we go into the freeze mask tool here, and then we just go over to the edges. Zoom out by using Alt and space. Make sure to cover her face because you don't want her features to be also warped. So from this, I go to the forward warp tool. Use a relatively bigger size tool by pressing the bracket keys. And I'm just gonna tuck the hair behind. Make sure if you're going to do on the background to also follow it up, so that it doesn't look odd. I'm gonna continue tucking that in. I'm just gonna turn off the mask. And that's what it looks like so far. Now, obviously it's not refined, so we're gonna take it back later, but while I'm in the Liquify tool, I also wanted to show you something. And that is I can add volume to the hair. So again, on the freeze mask tool, we just wanna highlight her face. And a hand. Selecting the forward warp tool. And just really going along the edges and adding that volume by pushing it out. So before and after. And click OK. And then we just go in and tidy it up by creating a new layer, going to the stamp clone, current and below, and this time with a smaller cursor using the square bracket keys, and just going along the edges. Now I'm just doing a very quick job, but obviously when it comes to the real deal, you got to take your time with it. And actually do a decent job, of course. Now, the other method is to use frequency separation. In case you don't know how frequency separation works, I do suggest you suss out my other video where I explain how it works and how to set it up. And also to let you know, on my website, there is a Photoshop action which will set it all up for you. You could go check it out in the link below. Let's use a different example here. Here we are, I've got an image of Selena and we're gonna go to actions, use my frequency separation Photoshop action, which will automatically prompt me. And again, you wanna select the right radius so that the details of this is gone. Now you can't get rid of it 100%. So my suggestion is you go probably about that is acceptable. Hit OK. Now we open up the group and go to high frequency separation layer, and then we use the stamp clone tool over here. Now we don't want to use current and below because we want to be working on the actual layer itself. So I'm going to go current layer as the sample again. I'm going to use the pen tool and just make a mask. Control enter. And then we go to select, modify, feather 3. Now in the high frequency separation layer, select the stamp clone tool, and then we are gonna go make the cursor bigger. And we're just gonna copy these areas here to get rid of the detail. And then there's the smudging, so we're gonna go on the low frequency layer, and then again with the same thing, we're just gonna copy that underlying color underneath. Now you don't always have to stamp clone as well, you can use the smudging tool, so I'll do it on this side. Say I use a lasso instead, just quickly show you. Go to high frequency separation, stamp clone. And then I'm just gonna go blow away the detail. And then you see the smudge there. So in the low frequency separation, I go to my mixer, sample that, and then just brush it down to get rid of that smudging. I've obviously, again, done a really quick job, so take your time with it and make sure you're accurate using the pen tool. So if I want to add a bit of pop to the model's hair, then generally I either use some coloring methods such as hue saturation or gradient maps and then masking it onto the hair. Or if I want to make it pop, then I use dodging and burning. Now, if you don't know what dodging and burning is, I have a video on how I set it up for skin retouching. And also I do have a Photoshop action on my website as well. So I'll leave the links to the video and the Photoshop action in the description below. So I go to my dodge and burn Photoshop action. It will automatically set up the curves and the assist layers. Then I go to global dodge and burn, select global dodge, demask. Then I'm gonna go over here, select the brush tool. Make sure I choose something other than a hard round. So my dodge and burn brush. I'm gonna set it to about, let's say 15%. And then I'm gonna zoom in by holding space Alt or Option key and then sliding to the right to increase, to zoom in, sorry, and sliding to the left to decrease. To make it pop, I generally dodge the highlighted areas. So in this case, I will go around to these parts where it's a bit brighter and just dodge it. And likewise with the burn, selecting the burn mask, I'll go around in the shadow areas so before and after. Adds a tiny bit more volume or a bit of depth to it. Now you can also use composites to completely change the shape of a hair, but I feel like that's a separate video, so I'm gonna do a separate video for it. There you have it. Those are just some of the techniques I use to edit hair. Obviously, I use a mixture of it all. I don't use just any one tool. So at the end of the day, it's about you and how you experiment on how to use the different methods and what works best for you. Just so you know, I now sell Lightroom presets on my website, including Photoshop actions, in case you didn't pick it up throughout the whole video. Anyways, I also offer one-on-one private editing tutorials for people who want a bit more detailed and guided learning. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and comment below what you think of the video. And of course, if you're not already following me on Instagram, it is @_mellow.k. That is where I post most of my photos. Until next time, peace out and stay mellow.